This was back a few years ago when I lived with my parents still. During my last couple of years living there and before I left for college, my parents bought and moved us into a new home. It was further away from the city and even most of the suburbs. It felt very isolated in the woods, and it was kind of a mansion, at least in my eyes. Even though it was just the three of us living there, we had family that stayed with us a lot. So I think that was their excuse for getting a bigger house than we needed. Anyway, this week was actually the rare time where my parents were the ones actually flying out to see the rest of our family. They offered for me to come with, but I didn't want to miss a week of school and had to do all the catch-up work and stuff. So I just stayed back and watched the house for them. One thing I found out very quickly at this new house was that I didn't like being alone in it. The place was just so large, and there were so many long hallways with empty spare rooms that it felt uncomfortable. Not to mention, the place was built over a century ago, which was kind of creepy on its own. I was old enough to kind of ignore that uneasiness, but it still never went away. The first 2 days that my parents were gone, everything was fine. I went to school, hung out with some friends, and just chilled at home. On the third day, I did the usual, going to school and then getting food with my buddies afterward, not getting back to the house until 6 o'clock or 7 that night. It was already pretty dark out and I was kind of exhausted, wanting to just lay in bed for the rest of the night. I headed inside and dropped my school stuff by the door, then walked up to the second floor. Pretty much right when I looked down the long main upstairs hallway, I noticed something off. One of the spare bedroom doors was open. I didn't immediately think there was actually something wrong, but it just brought that uneasiness back that I always felt. I walked down and looked into the spare room. It just had a bed and a couple of random pieces of furniture, but aside from that, there was nothing there. I closed the door, but still felt off about it. The thing is, my room was at the end of this hallway, so I walked past all these doors multiple times a day, and I can't see how I wouldn't have noticed this door being open until just now. I always hated when the doors were left open in this massive house because it just felt weird to walk past so many open rooms before chilling. I did a short walk through of the house, not looking into every room, but just looking for any signs that something was off. Seeing nothing else, I figured I'd just never noticed the open door and tried to not let it creep me out too much. Maybe it could have even opened up on its own while I was out of the house, like if it wasn't fully closed. Already, I went to my room and turned on the TV, trying to ease my mind. Unfortunately, it didn't help much. I kept thinking about the fact that I was alone in a huge mansion with no way to know what was going on in any of the other rooms. Not that something was going on, but it was the unknown that was creepy about it. 45 minutes to an hour went by before I was getting hungry for dinner. I left my room and headed down the hallway into the first floor. Another kind of strange thing about living in a house like this was that almost never were all the lights on. So, constantly, I was walking past dark rooms and shadows. While I was in the kitchen, I kept thinking I was seeing something in the far living room. Every time I'd look up, the room was dark and nothing was there. I thought I was going crazy. Everything was just getting to my head, and I really didn't want to give into the what I thought was unwarranted, anxious feelings I was having. I told myself I was creeped out over nothing and just ignored it. I made dinner, then walked back up to my room, but when I got up to that hallway, I instantly felt a chill run through me. That door was open again. I froze up and just stared down the dark hallway for maybe an entire minute. I couldn't think of how this was happening. In the moment, I was genuinely considering whether this place was haunted. I never believed in that stuff. But that was before living in a creepy-ass 100-year-old mansion in the middle of the woods. I quietly walked back up to the spare room, pushing the door more open and looking in. It looked exactly the same as it did before. I walked in and looked for any subtle signs, like a dirty shoe print or something that had been moved, but I found nothing at all. Only getting more uneasy, I left and went to my room, closing and locking the door. I sent a text to my parents, not trying to sound too alarmed, but just asking if they noticed the spare room door opening, or if there was a problem with it, or something. They responded quickly, saying they hadn't noticed anything and wasn't really sure what I was talking about. I said to not worry about it, and it was probably nothing, but honestly, I was getting more unsettled by the minute. It was like my gut knew something wasn't right. I think I was in my room, sitting on the bed with the TV on and eating for 10-ish minutes, when I heard what sounded exactly like footsteps in the hallway. I quickly reached for the remote and paused the TV just quick enough to hear a thump right outside my bedroom door. My heart was racing. There was a long pause. No sounds in the house at all, which made me too scared to even move. Then, whoever the hell was outside my room softly and slowly knocked on the other side of the door like they were just tapping on it. I couldn't believe this was happening. It was so surreal that I didn't know how to react. They didn't knock or tap on the door for what felt like a whole minute after that. So eventually, I called out, "Who's out there?" "I've called the cops already." A lie, of course, but I hoped to get them to leave. I knew that I had to call the cops at some point, but it felt like right now it wouldn't be helpful since it'd take at least 10 to 15 minutes for them to get here. So, I had to hold off on my own. The only response I got were 3 more knocks at the door, still in that slow, calm way that they did before. Finally, I decided to call the police. I figured if they were just going to stand out there and wait, then this was the best move. I got on the line with an operator giving my address and everything. They asked what the person was doing now. And as I started saying that they were just standing outside my bedroom door, I heard a loud scratching sound against the wood. It was one long scratch, like they were scraping something against the door. I started kind of freaking out, pleading for them to get here quickly. The door handle started moving back and forth, but thank God I locked it. Another minute or so passed before 3 more knocks tapped against the door, and then it went quiet again. It stayed quiet the whole 10 minutes I waited for the cops to arrive. When they did, there was no one outside my bedroom anymore. The only sign left behind from them was a long gash carved into the backside of the door, clearly from a knife. The officers tried investigating where they could have gotten inside from, but honestly, it was nearly impossible with how many entrances and windows that there were in the house. Also, most of the windows had old and unreliable locking mechanisms. Ultimately, no real leads or anything were found. My parents flew home as soon as they could. While nothing else ended up happening, I never felt safe in that house anymore. Every dark hallway and empty room felt even more eerie, and the woods surrounding the house were just unsettling. Just a week after the incident, I could have sworn I saw someone standing in the woods not far from the window, but it was dark. So maybe it was just a shadow. Thankfully, I don't live there anymore, and my parents sold the place just a couple months ago. Whatever was going on with that house, or whoever was stalking us in it, will remain unknown. Music, it was a pretty normal Friday night for me. I lived alone in a really small home in the suburbs, but worked an hour away in the city. Finally, reaching the weekend, I was ready to do absolutely nothing tonight and just watch YouTube, game, and maybe sleep in. I took a quick shower after getting home, then fired up the PlayStation and relaxed and gamed for a few hours. I even cracked open a few beers. The night was going pretty well, and I thought the only thing that could make it perfect was to get some pizza delivered. I ordered from a local pizza shop, just using their app to place the order with, then laid back on the couch and watched YouTube on the TV while I waited. After 45 minutes, though, I realized it had been a while since I'd placed the order and hadn't gotten any texts that they were on the way. I pulled my phone out and checked the app. It said there was a delay. I don't remember the exact message, but it was very generic, basically saying, "Sorry for the delay. Your order will be on the way soon." It was no big deal. I was trying to stay up late anyway, although I felt my eyes getting heavy. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Over the next 15 minutes, with YouTube playing in the background, I slowly dozed off. I woke up suddenly to the doorbell ringing multiple times. I shot up from the couch thinking, oh, the pizza delivery. I had no idea how long I was passed out for or how long the delivery guy had been waiting on me. I hurried over to the door and opened it. I was still really groggy, and having the couple of beers earlier didn't help at all. There was a man standing on my porch. "Sorry, I hope you weren't waiting long. How much do I owe you?" I said tiredly. The guy looked a little confused. I clarified. "For the pizzas, how much do I owe you?" It was as the words came out of my mouth that I realized this guy wasn't even holding any pizza boxes or anything at all. No uniform either. He had dark jeans and a grey hoodie flipped over his head and hands stuffed into his pockets. The guy didn't answer for an awkward amount of time, like he was still thinking about what I said. But then he smiled and said not to worry. The pizzas were still on the way. He stopped talking after that, just looking at me as if that were a normal answer. Even me, being a little drunk and really tired, I knew that was a weird response. Why would he be here if it was still on the way? But I just said, okay, and after another couple seconds of awkward silence, I closed the door. I rubbed my face and tried to regain my thoughts. Why was that interaction so strange? I was aware that I wasn't in the right mind, but unfortunately that made me think that maybe it wasn't as off as I was making it out to be. I put on a new video, then sat down and continued watching, only for me to fall asleep once again. This time, I woke up to a clicking sound. I didn't know what it actually was, though. However, I knew I'd only drifted off for a few minutes because the video was still running. I sat up again and waited for a doorbell or a knock or something, but there wasn't. I still didn't know what that click sound was, but it was then that I finally remembered to check the app for any updates on the order. I opened my phone, but didn't even get past the lock screen without being confused. It was 4 a.m. I placed the order at 11 o'clock, and the pizza shop was only open until 1 a.m. I quickly checked the app, seeing the order was delayed for an hour before getting cancelled by the shop, but then who was just at my door. I got up from the couch and walked through the hallway to the front door, checking out the peephole and seeing no one out there. I reached down to unlock and open the door, only to see it was already unlocked. I must have forgotten to lock it when I answered the door just a few minutes ago because I was so out of it. I opened the door and looked out, but saw nothing, just an empty and quiet neighborhood. I was way too tired and tipsy to be dealing with whatever was happening. Without getting any answers, I closed the door and instantly stopped to dead in my tracks, That sound, the door clicking into the doorway, it was exactly what I heard that woke me up. I felt my face go pale. In a split second, I replayed the whole interaction with the guy, realizing my mistake and that he was just going along with being the pizza delivery guy after I'd already mentioned it. What intentions could he possibly have for him to lie about? That I looked back into the dark and quiet home. Everything in me told me to leave. I quietly walked back down the hallway, trying to get my phone from the couch. Just when I did, I heard something move in the other room. I panicked, grabbing my phone and running for the front door. I ran out of the house and down to the end of the block, then dialed 911. The cops arrived pretty quick, just a few minutes after I called, but it still wasn't fast enough. The guy was long gone. I gave them every single detail I could think of, exactly what he looked like, what he said, and everything. But so far, that's all we got. And unless something else happens, it's likely where it'll be left at. I think, over that night all the time trying to figure out what really happened, but I don't know. It seems like the order being cancelled was just a really bad coincidence. The biggest question is why this random guy was outside my house ringing the doorbell at 4 a.m. to begin with. What was he initially intending? My guess is that he was scouting for empty houses or easy targets to either rob or worse. When I entered the door, he probably could tell I was drunk, tired, and not in the right headspace. So, he figured he could take advantage of that. I'm even willing to bet he waited outside the door and listened for whether or not I locked it. Then, he just waited a few minutes for me to go back to sleep. Had I not woken up or realized the situation I was in, that night could have gone much differently and likely would not have ended. Well, for me, in mid-2019, I moved to a new town for a work opportunity. I didn't have much when I got the job and moved, so I found the cheapest apartment possible and rented the smallest room. It was a one-bedroom unit on the second floor of a small complex, only having 4 units in total. They were very old and outdated, and honestly, not in a very nice area. For the first 3 months, I was the only one living in the complex. All 3 of the other units were vacant, which made me feel a little uncomfortable about the place. But it was only meant to be temporary until I saved enough for my new job. So I held out. Work turned out to be a lot more stressful than I hoped for, though lots of late nights, overtime, and just not the best work environment. I didn't have much time to spend in my apartment aside from sleeping. One night, I got home at 8 p.m. tired and barely awake. As I walked inside, I took my shoes off and walked down the hall to my room when there was a sudden knock against the door to my unit. I jumped, startled awake by how unexpected it was. I didn't see anyone outside when I was walking in. I stumbled back over to the door, and through the peephole I could barely see anything. I think the glass was either broken or had a stain or something covering it. Unsure who it was, I opened the door. Standing really close to the doorway was an older man, say late 40s to early 50s, with dark hair and stubble. His eyes were really striking, not in a good way, but in an unsettling way. "How can I help you?" His eyes opened a bit wider, and after a moment, he asked if I lived here. I thought that was a pretty strange question, but I just said, yeah, without thinking too hard about it. He grinned at me and said he was moving into the unit right next to me and just wanted to introduce himself. He then gave an awkward wave goodbye as he walked down to the unit next to mine and went in. Oddly, he never actually introduced himself, like told me his name or anything. I just thought he was a weird old man, but nothing to worry about. If anything, it was kind of a relief knowing someone else had moved into this otherwise vacant building that I was staying in alone that night. I had dinner and went to bed early, having another long day of work the following day. I got back around the same time as before, but this time, as I walked up the outdoor stairs to my unit, I saw blinds move in the window to the unit next to mine, the one that the old man said he moved into. The way the blinds were swaying looked like as if he were looking out the window at me. I hurried up to my door and got inside, feeling a little uncomfortable. I told myself it was likely nothing and to not overthink it. However, I again was only inside for maybe 30 seconds before there was a knock from the door. I went back over to the door and out of habit, I looked out the peephole again, only to be reminded that I couldn't see anything. So, I opened the door, already knowing likely who it was. It was the same man, looking exactly the same as last night. "Is there something you need?" "I'm just in a bit of a rush at the moment," I said, trying my best to not be rude, but really not wanting to talk to anyone right after a long day at work. The man didn't really react to what I said though. "Would you happen to know how the thermostat works in these units?" "I must be too old to figure it out," he said with a slight chuckle. Hoping this was as harmless a question as it seemed, I explained the very simple way it worked. I mean, these things had just a couple of buttons. It would be hard to not understand them. He nodded and smiled, but then asked if I could show him, as he thought he already tried what I just said. I reminded him that I was in a hurry and he apologized, but was being a little passive-aggressive and pushy, saying it'd only take 30 seconds and he really needed my help. To be fair, it was the middle of winter and pretty cold out, so if he really couldn't get his thermostat to work, I'd feel pretty bad. After a bit, I folded and said, "Okay, I guess I just thought it would get him to leave me alone." He led me down the balcony to his unit. The door was already open. The man walked in, but as soon as I saw the inside, I stopped in the doorway. His unit was empty. There wasn't a single piece of furniture or even a moving box anywhere, and it was dirty with paint peeling off the walls. It was clear from just looking at it that there was no way this unit had been rented out. Even more strange was a disgusting odor escaping through the doorway. The man noticed my hesitation and looked back at me. "Come on, it's just right here." I wasn't sure what to say, trying to think of an excuse to not go in. He told me again for me to come on in, but in the most unsettling and chilling way. His expression shifted from friendly to this dark, disappointed look. He took an aggressive step forward, and I quickly ran away from the doorway. I got into my unit and locked the door behind me. A few seconds later, the door handle clicked back and forth. He tried to open it. I started calling the police. The man paused for a minute, and it felt like he was probably listening in to what I was doing before he called out. He used a friendly voice asking what was wrong and that he only needed my help. He knocked on the door a few more times, and then I heard his footsteps leave, and it stayed quiet until the police arrived. The man was nowhere near the building by then. Turned out I was right. That unit was still vacant. He had broken in and been staying in there for a few days, probably keeping an eye on me to see when I left and got home from work every day. I think there's no doubt that things could have gotten a lot worse had I entered that unit with him, or had just let things go on for any longer. Who knows what he was planning? I moved out of there as soon as I could,